Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. This is very exciting. Our first recording of our new podcast, Armchair ESG, with Nathan Yates. I'm Rob Yates, Director of Communications for OWL ESG, and with me, as always, my partner in crime, Nate Najaro, Head of Product. Today, we are going to talk about the boogeyman, ESG. A lot of talk about ESG, not necessarily a lot of it sensible talk or rational talk or informed talk. So before we can talk about how ESG can be used, where it's effective, where perhaps the term is overused or oversimplifies or overweaponized, we have to say, what is ESG? So Nate, you break it down for everyone. What is
Yeah,
ESG?
Rob, excited to be on our first podcast here at OWL ESG. And ESG simply is just a framework of how stakeholders look at investing around the world when it comes to environmental concerns, social concerns, and governance concerns. So simply, it's looking at investing in a holistic framework. It's not anything that's super new. I mean, it's definitely come to the limelight recently, but impact investing has been around for a long time, right? If you think about apartheid South Africa, part of that, the way the part of that regime fell was people divesting out of companies and businesses in South Africa for a social good, which was to defeat apartheid, and using those mechanisms, it allowed people to vote really with their money and impact the society for good, so for the common good. So ESG is really just a framework of how to look at things, but it's definitely become a bit more controversial in our day and age. So yeah, we just we hope to educate and also bring different various views around it. And it's definitely not what it seems when you read about it or hear about it in the mainstream media.
So I really like that description, a framework. It's a framework for evaluating something, and that's all it's supposed to be.
Yep.
Now, there's a lot that comes out of that, to be sure, but ESG has been around for a long time. So starting way, way back, there are passages in the Bible that could be interpreted as God commanding people to be good stewards of the planet.
Yep.
ESG first came to the forefront in the 20s with investment firms that had socially conscious things to it. So alcohol, tobacco. I want to say in 1976, Pioneer Funds had the first ESG fund. The term ESG came from a UN report in 2006. It was the first time environmental and social governance was used, at least written down. It could have been used before that, I'm not certain. But it has exploded since then, and it's become very political. And I agree with you. The political part of it is silly. So, I mean, anytime there's politics, you're going to see people arguing about it and looking for ways to drive votes. But if you don't want to invest in a company, for example, that employs slave labor in its supply chain or has conflict minerals, that's ESG.
Yep.
If you are a Catholic and you don't want to invest in a company that profits from abortion, that's ESG.
Yep.
If you don't want to invest in a company, for example, that manufactures firearms, if you don't want to invest in a company that sells pornography, if you don't want to invest in a company that has operations in Budapest because you don't like that city, maybe get a little extreme on that.
Hey, there you go. No, that's exactly right. And the politicization of ESG recently has muddied the waters a lot of what this truly is about. And you wrote a great article, so I'm going to plug your article about stop politicizing ESG. It's on our website, but you made some incredibly distinct points around that. And really, what we need to look at is, you pulled that article up, but it's worth going and reading. And to take a look at what ESG is and what it is not. But really, it's not telling people what to do. or even how to think. It's giving people information and data from where they can go and make informed decisions around where they want to invest and what they want to be part of. And so take it, you can go to two extremes. You can be so pro ESG that you're trying to mandate things on people, trying to say this must be this way versus, hey, ESG is the devil and you shouldn't look at it at all. And really it's in the middle, right? There's a lot of things that can be debated around what's involved with ESG, but then there are certain things that shouldn't be debated, right? So think about like what you mentioned, human trafficking, slave labor, things like that, forced labor. Those shouldn't be debatable. Those you should want to know if your money is going anywhere near that as a company or as an individual. And there's some countries that you probably would want to know what they're up to in order to make sure that you're not propagating human suffering unnecessarily. But a lot of ESGs, like you said, alcohol, gambling, tobacco, firearms, things where people may differ in their belief, or it just might not be part of your conscience or what you want to be a part of, and part of providing data to our clients is allowing them to see exactly where their investments
are. So along those lines, I want to jump into this article a little bit. I appreciate the plug. I'm a huge fan of shameless self-promotion all the time.
No problem, here for you.
The argument I make in this article is that if we look at even just recent history, some of the most notable disasters, the Chernobyl meltdown, the Chinese Great Famine, the Titanic, the Challenger shuttle, COVID reliance on ventilators, the dot-com crash, the global financial crisis, that all of these were at their foundation, while the causes of each obviously dramatically different, the juice that drove those causes, perhaps the gasoline on the engine, if you will, was myopic perspective and then humans doubling down despite their mistakes. And then I go into the Silicon Valley Bank failure, and I make the argument that while that's being blamed on the perceived allegiance to ESG principles for the bank management, and I do acknowledge it is theoretically possible that bank management was so focused on something called ESG that they ignored other signs of coming disaster. And certainly, I mean, I would argue it had to do with concentration risk, which is a pretty basic bank management, and that there were other structural problems like the CEO being on the board of the Federal Reserve that's supposed to be overseeing them.
Yeah. We'll let another podcast tackle that. But
yeah. Seriously, that'll be a fun one. We'll have that'll be an after hours one. We'll have to pour a drink for it.
Yeah.
But you get this myopic, singularly focused viewpoint of this is what happened, this is how it happened, and this is how it can be prevented. And it goes really badly both ways. So you have one side pushing, we need quote unquote clean energy. Well, what's clean energy? What entails clean energy? Is it wind? Because wind farms are, especially off the northeast coast of America, have led to something like a 300% increase in the beaching deaths of cetaceans, so dolphins and whales, because these giant wind turbines are affecting their sonar. Is it solar along with wind? Because to me, ESG involves the human impact. And when the sun and the wind stop going, those stop working. You need to create batteries to make it work long term. Lithium is in batteries. We all are now aware of just how horrible cobalt and lithium mining conditions are. Meanwhile, people are pushing nuclear away. There's certainly a scare factor, and I get it. Nuclear used incorrectly or aggressively to hurt people is very good at hurting people. But nuclear energy, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, completely clean, 100% clean. And we've gotten much better at recycling fuel. We've gotten much more efficient with fuel. We've developed much safer reactor designs. And yet, some significant percentage of reactors in the US still use analog because it's so expensive to meet regulation to update to digital.
Yep. Yep. No, I mean, absolutely. And I spent 8 years in the nuclear industry, right? And so it's one of those things where, again, ESG is a framework to look at things holistically. You're absolutely right. Nuclear is a baseload power source, meaning it stays online consistently for a long period of time. And wind and solar are variable, meaning that, a cloudy day or a windless day will drop, the output of those generation plants. And so you have to have a mixture of both. And I remember when I worked at a few nuclear plants in the Midwest, and we would be down for refueling. You'd make sure your coal plants and your other gas plants were online, because when the nuke went down, that was a significant amount of energy off the grid, and you wanted to make sure your other baseload generators were online. So it's not saying, oh, don't go after nukes, or don't involve nuclear energy, or just go completely solar or wind. It's saying, here's the information, here's the data, and let's put together a coherent strategy around that. And it goes back to cobalt mining, right? So you look at both sides of the argument that says, hey, we want all vehicles to be EVs, right? By 2030, 2035. Well, where does a lot of the minerals for the cobalt come from that goes into EVs? Well, 90% of it comes from the Congo, which then you have to look at governance. The Congo is one of the worst governed places on the planet. And so you have, child labor and forced labor and slave labor in the Congo. So now we have to think about, well, maybe we should, think about investing in other minerals in that technology in order to get off our dependence of cobalt. So it's neither one or the other. It's a holistic view. And part of it is wanting to be able to allow people to see everything that's going on and make informed and clear decisions, and not just follow or parrot, a pundit that's talking on the news one way or the other. There are valid concerns on each end, but if you can come to the middle and look at it holistically, I believe there's a path forward. It really comes down to data and following the information and having good, reliable, transparent data in order to provide to the clients in order to make that decision.
100%. Now, I'm always aware of the accusation, oh, you're both sidesing an issue, but I think in this case, the both sides applies, because on one side, you really do have, they're not environmentalists, they're climate activists. They're not operating on data. They're pushing solutions that can be worse than the problem, especially if you're arguing to jump into these wholesale. So I'm not coming down on wind or solar, nor am I promoting wind or solar. I'm saying every single decision you make is going to have upsides and downsides. On the flip side, when you have people saying we should simply burn, the dirtiest fossil fuels willy-nilly with no attempt to reduce emissions because climate change isn't real, I personally hesitate a little bit, and not, I cringe almost. But it's not. So this is the way I look at it. I have this graph up on the screen. This is Earth's temperatures correlating with increase in carbon parts per million over the last 140 years. And to me, it seems pretty simple. When you go up a mountain, it gets colder because the air gets thinner. Carbon, and the air acts as a blanket. It gets warmer down the mountain because it's capturing more heat. Of all the elements out there, carbon is particularly good at trapping heat. And this is why life is carbon-based. And in fact, this is where fossil fuels come from. We're talking about just massive, expansive forests from hundreds of millions of years ago that died, congealed, succumbed to the pressure of hundreds of millions of years of layers of soil on top of them, and turned into coal, oil, and natural gas. And now all that energy is packed in there. When you release the energy, you're releasing heat, of course, but that's the energy that drives things. But you also release the carbon, which is, again, really good at trapping heat. So if we take this seriously and act like adults, which, believe it or not, I actually think we're capable of doing. I think if you ignore the noise around this stuff.
That's right. That's right.
It's surprising how many people agree on this as an issue from all sides of the political spectrum.
Absolutely. If you take the time to dig in deeper, right, and not and even challenge your own narrative of thinking, right, to go,
Always.
I might be here again. There are some issues where I really believe there's no debate, but most of them just to challenge and go, okay, I'm gonna take a deeper look at this. I didn't know, and then follow your policies out and think, well, if I do this, then this, and affect this, and to come back and at the end of the day, just say, well, where do I want to invest my value? Well, in order to do that, I need good, reliable data and not just sentiment about what's going on, right? Sentiment's fine, but at the end of the day, you want hard facts on the ground. There's this debate of, ESG is just a problem. It's forcing people to make decisions that they're against. Is completely false, right? And businesses, you should really want to understand what the businesses are doing, right? Just the bottom line is, some people say the bottom line is enough. It doesn't matter. Let businesses be businesses. But I get it for a lot of things. That's true. But then there are things where, again, you might want to know that you're propagating human suffering somewhere, or you're part of that supply chain where there's human suffering, untold human suffering, that supply chain. You might just want to know about that. And the bottom line there may not be enough. And at the end of the day, it's really not about mandating people to do things, but it's really to appeal to their conscience and then also giving people choice, right? Rob, you and I we talk offline, and when we get on our offsites about, we are definitely for people to choose, and we're definitely for smaller government. But with that freedom comes responsibility.
Absolutely.
And the responsibility to understand, what you're getting involved in at an investment level. So I like to think about it as, some of these soldiers say, well, I was just following orders. I had nothing to do with this. Well, you were following orders, but sometimes,
yeah,
sometimes it's obvious that you probably shouldn't have followed those orders. And I'm not trying to be trite or to be simplistic about it. I'm sure that's a very difficult situation to be in. But it is with data now and freely accessible data around the world and better data coming out, that we are able to provide information to people to make better decisions. Yes, are there people that are going to try to game the system? Absolutely. That comes in the scoring, and we've seen the different scoring mechanisms and how wild they can be. And one of our products, Consensus Score, tries to bring all the data in and see where the wisdom of the crowd is in terms of scoring, right? Because you do have some companies that score wildly one way or the other, and so we bring in primary sources and secondary sources to try to give people a better picture of where that company sits. So, and then that's why we work so hard on detailed data, right? Getting underneath where that data is coming from to give those raw scores to our clients in order for them to make better decisions and better information. And data is just getting better, so it will get better in order for us to help our clients do just that.
So you bring up actually a couple interesting points there. One thing I wanted to ask you about. So we recently had this bit of political theater where the Department of Labor passed a rule as part of its ERISA platform in terms of investing and fiduciary duties of investors or those managing money, based on an executive order from President Biden that essentially allowed investors to include ESG as a consideration at all. And we've discussed, we're going to do a podcast on this in detail later on, but it's centered on the word pecuniary. So they got rid of the word pecuniary as in only focused on returns. And the Republicans passed a bill to roll that back, which President Biden then vetoed. And I think what gets lost in the shuffle of the politics of this bill is that, okay, there are arguments about whether or not investing in companies that are not carbon sustainable would be a good investment over a long term. And I think that's a valid argument to have. But you could ostensibly have a company that's highly profitable because it employs only slave labor. Is that somewhere
Right.
you want your money? I mean,
Yeah.
that's terrible.
Right.
Um, and this is what happens with this black and white thinking. But the way to address that, what you just said, is with good data, with objective data, with getting your personal feelings out of it. And so it feels like a natural marketing segue, to be fair, about I've been marketing. What was it that attracted you to Owl?
What attracted me is it was very similar to what I was doing in my prior life, where we were looking at data again, research data to combat money laundering, right, and anti-corruption, and really around KYC, know your client for bank, meaning understand where your client's money was coming from, who your clients were, and what business they were involved in. Very same principle. Are you trying to bank somebody that's making their money by trafficking people into the United States, or selling illegal substances, and they're trying to bank that money into the international finance system? And so, I even then it was controversial. Yeah, there were people like, oh, the government shouldn't care what I do with my dollars or where I move my money. And generally, I say yes, that's true. However, there are certain elements in society where we as a society should care. And if we don't, that's a poor reflection on us that we are not, concerned. I mean, there were instances of nail salons in Manhattan that were transacting after hours, highly transacting money, between 1 or 4 or 5 a.m. And one banker just looking at the data said, wait a second, what's going on here? This makes no sense, right? And so when they dug deeper into it, they figured out that these salons were trafficking people into New York City, and then they were forcing them to pay back. So, of course, these people paid a ton of money to get over here legally. And then they were being forced to pay that money back before they were literally set free. So their passports were taken and all that. But more insidious was they were being forced to buy all their needs, the deodorant, the toothbrush, all their essential needs back from the owners of these salons at exorbitant prices. And all of that transaction would be happening after hours. And one lone banker was looking at this data going, this makes no sense, digging deeper into it. And in that one small instance, the DA, Manhattan DA got involved and was, able to really alleviate the suffering of a few people. So KYC, countering the financing of terrorism, watching, where money goes around the world to counter the financing of that. So in my previous life, I was heavily involved, and I saw the power of good information helping stem the tide of some real evil stuff that was going on in the world. Now, you can take it to an extreme, extreme monitoring sense. I know people are fearful of monitoring, but that's not what I saw when I was working at this company. It was just more of a common sense approach, look at what's going on. And when I saw what Al was doing, getting away from just sentiments and unexplainable, approaches to scoring or just some loosey-goosey ways of coming up with scoring a company, and how serious they were about collecting primary data, right, and raw data, and then gathering that data, analyzing it, and then aggregating and analyzing it for our clients and putting it in front of them and allowing them to overlay that data on their investments to see what was going on was very appealing to me. That's why I joined. It was really for the transparency and the accuracy of the data, and understanding that this could make a big difference. And then not labeling our children. There's a few children we'll label, like you said, human trafficking, slavery, bad, right? I'll just say you label those bad. There's other things where nuclear or gambling or alcohol or firearms, where we're just going to tell you, this is what the company, are they primarily involved in these? Are they second order providing, materials to manufacture these items? That's for you to make the call, right? And so that's what really appealed to me about Al and joining Al specifically.
I like it.
How about you?
So, well, to follow up on that, and then I will go straight into why I joined. So the impact of data really does matter, and having good, reliable data. So we would say we don't want to support slave labor. We don't want to invest in companies that support slave labor. We don't want to buy products that are produced by slave labor. But how many products come from the Xinjiang region of China that we're using? And you don't necessarily know. I mean, this is where data matters. So, as you mentioned, we both believe that the market is going to be the best way to solve problems. I think that viewpoint is very often falsely intertwined with an assumption that we don't necessarily see the same problems. And I disagree with that completely. I would love to see the beautiful world I grew up in preserved for my children. And, if it turns out their children and their children's children and so on. So when I discovered Alan, I was like, oh, so you're not waiting for like the big savior to come in from a regulatory perspective up above and make these concessions or changes or whatever it may be, which could drive some positive change, but that's also going to have unintended consequences. It always does, and it makes you nervous. And you often see that the entities that are able to game the system, they don't cause change; they just benefit from that. But this was like, hey, here's a market-based solution. Let's give people the best possible foundation on which to stand as they work to make these changes. So if you want to invest in a company that's doing good things with greenhouse gas emissions, they're actually doing good things with greenhouse gas emissions. And then other companies see, hey, this is attracting capital. Investors are backing this up. Consumers are buying this product. And then they start making these changes. There was one example that has always stuck with me. I want to say 2013, Clear Choice Hotels had a proposal for shareholders they wanted to replace all of the shower heads in the entire national and international infrastructure of hotels that they had. And it was a big investment. I think it was $700 million or something. It passed and they had recouped their loss in like 5 years. And the reason is the shower heads that they were installing had this sort of zigzag pattern of shooting water out. So it reduced water usage by roughly 75%, while actually making guests feel like they took a fuller shower. So the guest satisfaction scores were going up. This is a sort of market innovation that drives real positive change. You have regulation that comes in and says, for example, okay, you need to limit your water usage to this amount. Yes, it will generally reduce water usage, but it doesn't cover the gaps that it creates. There are downsides to that. People go to other hotels. People travel less. It gets more expensive in other areas.
Yep. That's right. I think what you said was innovation. So once you understand what's going on, that example with the shower heads, that's mind-boggling. So 75%, they feel like they've gotten a fuller shower. It's innovation like that I believe will drive change for the better. So, you think about the cobalt that goes in EVs. I know I was listening to another podcast where I forget the name of the new technology that they're trying to, or the new minerals that they're trying to use in EVs. I know Tesla is at the forefront of trying this out or has implemented it to get away from cobalt, right? To say, let's invest in other ways that lessens the demand for some of this stuff in places that are poorly governed around the world. And by doing that, you can both be innovative, make money, and do so not by breaking the back of the most vulnerable people around the world. And really, it comes down to a question is, do you want to know or do you not want to know? And I think more increasingly, people are going to want to know. And it's not a question of forcing people to make one decision or another. Again, on most of it, it's the ability to give people the data so they can make the decision. We can act like adults. We can trust each other to act like adults without demonizing each other on one side or the other. And really, before you demonize people, again, outside of the the very blatant, which I would say blatant items such as, like we said a million times, human trafficking or slavery or sex trafficking or any of that, where you can look at it holistically and try to understand, wow, this is where my investments are going. Here are some of the second and third order knockoff effects of what that could be. Am I okay with that? If you're okay with that, you're okay with that. If not, how do I readjust that and still find investments that will return similar profit at the end of the day, or divest completely out of it and go somewhere else. So it really at the end of the day, yeah. So
even in the worst case scenarios,
yep,
the slave trade, the sex trafficking.
Yep.
If the market for that dries up, then that behavior stops.
Yep.
So it's like you can morally demonize that, but practically speaking, all you have to do is take away any money that supports it, and then it stops.
Yep. Yeah. At the end of the day, I really believe if we keep that, we try to educate people, and I have friends that are very opinionated on this ESG industry on both sides. I live in Texas, so trust me, I get a lot of eyebrows and when I'm able to sit down and explain what it is that we're trying to do, and basically we're trying to help really keep the ESG industry accountable, right? I think there's just been a lot of interesting stuff that's happened in the past few years about, just trying to get ratings out there or trying to, I don't know what the impetus, except to sell bad information. What we're trying to do is help in saying, no, we want to bring the best data, the freshest data, right? The more reliable data, as quickly and efficiently to the market as possible. Really, that's our driving mission here at ESG.
I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you very much. As always, a pleasure. Looking forward to getting these going on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Hope everyone tuning in for the first one enjoyed. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions, guest ideas, think you'd be a good guest for Armchair ESG with Nate and Yates, you can reach out at communications@owlesg.com. Nate,
and our next one is our CEO, right? Our first interview will be our CEO,
yes.
Ben Webster. So don't miss that. So.
All right, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, guys.